Dear colleagues, good afternoon and welcome at the third webinar of the CIPUS network. Each webinar is organized by a member of the network. Today's speaker and host is Professor Carmen Dutu from Romania, who has invited two distinguished colleagues, Professor Dr. Birgitta Johansson-Lind from the Gothenburg University and Dr. Viola Parente-Chapkova from the Turku University. At the end of our session, we will have a discussion, so please feel free to write your questions in the chat during the talk or ask them at the end of the presentation. But first, I would like to present Professor Dutu, and then I will give a floor to her. Dr. Carmen Beatriz Dutu is an associate professor and the director of the MA program in Intercultural Anglo-American Studies at Dimitri Cantemir Christian University in Bucharest. Her research interests revolve around feminist literary criticism with a focus on late Romanian 19th century gender studies and digital humanities. Her books, Masculine Feminine in the Romanian mid-19th century novel, A Gender Approach, published in 2011, Feminist Literary Criticism, A Comparative Perspective, published 2012, and many articles published in international journals aim at rewriting the literary Romanian canon from a feminine perspective. Dr. Dutu is part of several international academic networks focusing on feminist historiography, the most recent being the CIPUS Women Writers in History Network, where she is also a founding member. So, dear Carmen, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Katya, for this opportunity to share our group's research with the international academic community and with our students, dear students, yes, because the CIPUS network is mostly about them. And I noticed that it really promises to become a strong collaborative platform. And for this, I'm thankful to you to be part of it from the outset and entrusting me with this membership. So allow me to introduce my guests for today's discussions, dear guests. Dr. Birgitta Johansson-Lind from Gothenburg University and Dr. Viola Chapkova from Turku University and also Charles University, right, Viola. So Dr. Birgitta Johansson-Lind is a senior lecturer in comparative literature with a specialization in theater at the Department of Literature, History of Ideas and Religion at the University of Gothenburg. Her expertise is in gender and Scandinavian theater historiography, and transnational studies. Her experience with these fields has resulted in national funding of several research projects, and the results have been published in a peer review monograph. I won't read the Swedish title with your permission, like A Wild Bird in a Cage, and thank you for providing me the translation, published in 2019. And in various peer-reviewed chapters in anthologies and academic periodicals. Dr. Johansson-Lind is a co-writer of Swedish Women Writings on Export, Tracing Transnational Reception in the 19th Century, 2019. Welcome again, Birgitta. And thank you for accepting my invitation. And Dr. Viola Parente-Chapkova is an adjunct professor at the University of Turku, Finland, and Charles University in Prague, the Czech Republic. Currently, she works as a lecturer at the Department of Literary Studies at the University of Turku. Her major research interests are literary history with a particular emphasis on the founding siècle Finnish literature in a broader European cultural context, gender studies, and digital humanities. She has authored numerous studies on founder siècle women's writing with focus on decadent women's writing, edited and co-edited publications such as Nordic Literature of Decadence, Routledge 2020. And at present, she is the leader of two research projects, Text on the Move, Reception of Women's Writing in Finland and Russia, 1840 and 2020, and Fiction as a Promoter of Language Learning Among Adults with IM/Migrant Background, welcome Viola as well. So these are my two distinguished guests for today. And thank you very much for joining us today in the webinar, Women's Reading and Writing at the Fringes of Europe. And this is actually one of the many events which prove the interconnections between researchers, projects, and networks that I will be happy to describe a little bit after your interventions. Both of my guests today have extensive, as you can see, you've seen extensive expertise in the field of feminist historiography. But indeed, it's your expertise in the topic of intimacy, in particular, Birgitta and Viola, that is the focus of our discussion today. So would you like to develop on this aspect in relation to your research? Whoever wants to take the floor. Birgitta?
Should I start or should Viola start? I should start. Okay. Yes. First of all, I would like to say thank you to both Katja and Carmen for organizing this, and to Carmen for inviting me. I'm much honored to have this opportunity to share my take on intimacy in my research. And I will start by sharing the screen with a little PowerPoint presentation, because otherwise I don't think you can understand what the name of my playwrights and other things that is in Swedish. Okay, I hope you all can see this, and I will change to the next picture. In my research, I explore intimacy in the works by three late 19th century authors and playwrights. Swedish playwrights. Their names are Ann-Charlotte Leffler, Alfhild Agrell, and Victoria Benediktsson. I have also investigated the European reception and dissemination of the plays by Leffler, which all deal with different kinds of intimacies. I have mainly focused on France, Germany, and Great Britain, and that is because that's language reasons. These are the languages that I can do research in. Otherwise, it would have been really interesting to explore other countries at the peripheries or the fringes of Europe. The result has so far been published in a monograph in Swedish. The English translation that Carmen just read, I will repeat: Like a Wild Bird in a Cage, Melodrama, Identity, Love and Emancipation in Ann-Charlotte Leffler's, Alfhild Agrell's and Victoria Benediktson's plays of the 1880s. The transnational research is published in a chapter in Swedish Women's Writings on Export, but also in a number of our articles in anthologies and academic press. Agrell, Benediktsson and Leffler, they were contemporaries of Henrik Ibsen and August Strindberg, who are a little bit more known in Europe than these female writers are. In the 1880s, these female writers, their plays were more frequently staged than Strindberg's at Scandinavian theaters, actually. They were also translated into several European languages and staged in England and Germany. Their successes as playwrights did not last for very long, though. By the early 20th century, their plays were being judged as low quality and recognized as simply constructed melodramatic pieces of indignation. In my analysis of, in total, 9 of their plays, the point of departure is at the very heart of that pejorative label, namely the melodramatic traits and their effects. I reclaim the label by showing that the melodramatic elements are vital components in a dramaturgy representing female experience. Compared to Henrik Ibsen's radical plays on marriage, the dramaturgies of Agrell's, Benediktsson, and Loeffler's plays construct a different point of view from which the criticism towards the conventional marriage is delivered. And this is done by focusing on the female protagonist rather than the plot. By combining melodrama theory with gender theory, mainly emanating from the political philosophy of Hannah Arendt and the phenomenological existentialism of Simone de Beauvoir, I propose that the melodramatic elements construct a phenomenological mimesis of the experience of the body in situation. By deploying melodramatic elements, the reactions, feelings, and emotions shaped by the protagonist's subordinated social position are dramatized in these plays. My analysis show how these dramatizations are structured to criticize established gender norms and to advocate a widening of women's space of living and agency. Furthermore, it elucidates how these playwrights, by giving voice to women's experiences, renegotiate the dramaturgical norms of 19th century theatre. I also claim that male playwrights and female playwrights took part in the theatrical field from different positions, and women had a much more limited space of movement than male dramatists. Ideas on femininity and decency prevented women playwrights from expressing ideas that was too radical, and they had to be very precautious in how to construct their plays. In a theatrical environment in which the ideas on quality of art were quite tightly connected to a conservative morality, which of course included norms on feminine decency, a female playwright could not be too artistically bold if she wanted her plays to be staged at the theaters. Sensitive ideas on female identity, love, and sexuality are therefore ambivalently expressed in Agrell's, Loeffler's, and Benediktson's plays. Scenes presenting sensitive intimacies can be interpreted in two ways, either in accordance with the moral norms at the mainstream theaters or in a more radical way. The ambivalence shows the precarious, vulnerable situation for a female playwright in the theater field, as well as in the larger public domain. My research on the transnational dissemination on Anne-Charlotte Loeffler's plays during the period 1880 to 1925 shows that in Europe, she was mainly represented by her prose fiction. But her greatest success is not fictional. It is Anne-Charlotte Loeffler's biography on the Russian mathematician Sonia Kovalevsky, who also was her close friend, that was her most widely translated and disseminated work in Europe. It was published in several editions in the same language. Concerning Loeffler's dramatic works, there are just a little more than 20 translations of her plays in total. I have researched its dissemination in France, Germany, and Great Britain more closely. Germany is the only country in which I have found evidence of stagings of her plays at the theaters. 3 of her plays were staged: the play Elf in Hamburg, and An Angel of Deliverance, and the play Family Bliss in Frankfurt am Main. These are comedies and do not belong to Loeffler's most radical plays on intimacy. The radical play True Women, which harshly critiques the gender power relationship in marriage, was published in Great Britain. First, as a series in Annie Besant's periodical Our Corner. Then it was distributed to the theaters in a limited edition, but it was never staged. Later, it was published in an edition that was circulated also in the United States. In France, another of a radical plays on intimacy, How to Do Good, was published in a socialist periodical, but never staged. Some of the conclusions that I draw from this are the following. The poor dissemination of Loeffler's plays at the theatres can be explained by the theatrical landscape in the three countries. The theatres were mainly commercial and needed more lightweight stuff to please the audiences. The avant-garde theatres that popped up in Berlin and Paris by the end of the 19th century were mainly male businesses. In this way, women playwrights who wrote radical avant-garde plays were edged out because of the commercial demands at the mainstream theatres and the difficulty to get access to the avant-garde theatres. They were situated in between these two kind of theatres. At the Independent Theatre Society, an avant-garde theatre in London, True Women was actually rehearsed but never staged before an audience because of problems with the rights to the play, which were owned by the translator and not by Anne-Charlotte Loeffler herself. And this translator, he objected to the theatrical production at the Theatre Society. Number 2, there was a great biographical interest in Loeffler as an independent new woman. She was a female author who wrote boldly on love and other intimacies. She traveled Europe without male company, and she divorced her husband. Her plays True Women and How to Do Good is often mentioned in the biographical articles on her. She eventually turns into a cosmopolitan celebrity in the radical intellectual circles of France, Germany, and Great Britain. Although her being Swedish was an important stroke in the image created by the press. Therefore, when researching the impact of Loeffler in these three countries, life and literature cannot be separated. And I think that that goes for many other women that wrote radically on intimacy at this point of time, at the fin de siècle. Number 3, in 1884, Loeffler traveled Europe with a female friend. They stayed in London for several months, and Loeffler made acquaintances among important persons within the new religious and socialist movements and among the suffragettes. This network was vital to the translation and publications of a radical plays. In a larger research project, the social movements across national borders would be fruitful environments to explore as reception spaces for women's literature and theatres on matters of intimacy. I have also researched the play True Women in the Nordic theatrical landscape and found that it was actually staged for 40 years. And in theatre histories and literature histories, it says that it lost its topicality after 5 or 6 years, but this is not true according to my investigations. So what I do now is to go on with that research to also research the provinces. I've only researched the capital cities so far. So my research circulates around the dramaturgy of intimacy and also the reception of these dramaturgies. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you very much, Birgitta, for this absolutely captivating account of your research. And it's just, you just brushed upon the surface, actually, I know. So it's really fascinating, and I'm really hoping to be able to invite you with other occasions for our students and for our community to benefit. I don't have the time now to make any comments, although I'm jumping off my seat here, because there were so many similarities, as you said, with women from other cultures. May they be available to you or me because of the language barriers, but I just identified, like from the top of my head, the divorcees, travelers, cosmopolitan. These three characteristics are definitely common with these women who are so avant-garde, you know, in every respect. But I'm sure that you will have interesting comments in our second part of our workshop, of our webinar, and I don't want to take time of Viola's presentation. So Viola, so thank you once again, Birgitta, and I'm inviting Viola to make her presentation now. Viola, if you want to share the screen, the floor is yours. Or the screen.
Yeah. Am I share screening already?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Great. So, first of all, also thank you very much, Carmen, for the introduction and for having us here today. It's a pleasure and honor really to be at the CIPUS event. I have been very impressed with what you have achieved already as a network, and it's really nice to give my talk here today. And thank you, Katja, for organizing this event. I have thought that I would talk about my encounters with intimacy in my research from various perspectives. So I thought that I would just map what I have done vis-a-vis intimacy in my work so far, and it will tackle several aspects of intimacy, and I will end with actually our collaboration with Birgitta and Carmen that began well 2 years ago, 1 year and a half or so. So first, just a very, very brief reminder of the complexity of the concept of intimacy. Obviously, every concept is complex and very, very difficult when one wants to explore it more deeply. I will not dwell for too much time on this. I just thought that I would bring up one of the very, very many possible definitions or ways of looking at intimacy from Pratt and Rosner's work, where intimacy invokes a cluster of related ideas: privacy, familiarity, love, sex, informality, and personal connection. Intimacy suggests something hidden away from the larger world, apparent only to the one or few on the inside. And I have highlighted the words that I think I will be tackling mostly in my talk, the words and concepts most relevant for what I have been doing with intimacy. And what I have been very interested in intimacy was precisely this ambivalence, the way it is connected both to the so-called positive and negative feelings, if we divided it so bluntly. And for example, I have been working a lot with the concept of love, which has been also researched in feminist literary criticism from various perspectives, and proven to be, of course, very difficult to deal with in various contexts, various epochs, periods, etc. And also intimacy in connection with the so-called ugly feelings, to use Shen and Guy's concept. Especially I have been working with the feeling or affect or emotion, I will not go into the distinction now, of shame. So intimacy in Decadent New Woman's Search for Subjectivity in Fantasy-equal Works by Women was actually, or has been, one of the major strands of my intimacy development, so to say, and my case study on which I have been focusing has been the Finnish writer Al Onerva, who published most of her works throughout the 20th century, but my focus has always been on the very early oeuvre of Al Onerva, which manifests very strong features of symbolism and mostly decadence. And this figure of the decadent new woman, which is an oxymoron in itself, and her search of intimacy is obviously full of contradictions and many contradictory feelings and emotions and other aspects attached to this enterprise in various spheres of life and art, as obvious, especially in the novel Mirdia from 1908. And there I have been working similarly as Gita, but in different context and in a different way with the concept of mimesis. And mimesis as identification was one of my departure. Sorry, there is some.
Okay, it was just somebody's microphone was turned on. I turned it.
Okay, sorry. I thought, yeah. So intimacy as identification would be one of these major issues here when mimesis is figured through intimacy. And there I have been looking at what has been called pedagogy of seduction, for example, by Diane Fass, meaning the intimate relationship between the teacher and the pupil, or any kind of formation, pedagogical formation. Intimate relationships with men, women, dealt with in the work within the development of the protagonist, relationships with her parents, with idols, imaginary or artistic objects, as we know from decadent works, which can be much more important targets of intimacy and identification than the so-called real or living people. And then I also tackled the theme or the topic of decadent new woman as a seeker for spirituality. I already dealt with it in my older work. Intimacy in the search for the spiritual dimension of womanhood was one of the strands that I found fascinating, but actually I have been coming back to it only recently, and I will come back to it also here and now. It is something that has to do with this hidden, aspect that there was in the definition. Then I was dealing with intimacy when I was looking at mother-daughter relationships in contemporary prose by women. And the topic of mother-daughter relationships is very dear to me. I share it also with some of my colleagues, like Päivi Lappalainen, for example, who I hope is here also with us. And I covered that in the contemporary prose by Finnish women writers. So it was a leap from the early 20th century to the very end of or the turn of the 20th and the 21st century. And the result were these two articles, Shame, Rebellion, and Matrilineage, in this anthology here, and then an article in the book that I co-edited called Shame on You, Critical Studies in Shame, but that one was in Finnish. And I discussed the 90s production by Finnish women writers with, again, case studies by these three women writers here. And I was looking at these literary figurations of what Marianne Hirsch has called the most private and the most formative of women's relationships, where obviously intimacy plays a key role. And my analysis led in this very specific context and in this very specific case study to rather sad results. I have mapped to the positive and negative aspects of shame in the mother-daughter intimate relationships, but there was in the sphere, so to say, of the real, when we were not, within the sphere of the dreams or hopes or, some kind of unreal events, the mother-daughter intimacy looked rather bleak. It seemed it would not be possible in the realm of other than non-verbal communication. In verbal communication, it proved very difficult, and the daughter's physical intimacy was sometimes totally impossible in these novels unless the mother was dead and the daughter could just be saying goodbye to her, relating very intimately to her body as well. So this was the very case study within this context. Then I was always paying attention to the mother-daughter relationships also in the other works I have been researching, and I hope that I will still be coming back to it one day in more depth. This is what I have been already talking about, intimacy in women's spiritual seekership, which I came back to about 2 years ago when I was asked to contribute to publication where this theme was very relevant. And so this is exactly this hidden away from the larger world. The concept of seekership has been in the main role, so to say, here, and I have found it very, very interesting and productive. It was coined within this, sorry, context of fantasiacal art and thought by the Finnish art historian Nina Kokkinen, who adapted it from religious studies, where it has been used mostly in conjunction with the present world, or at least the post-world ways of people searching for various kinds of spirituality. In the fantasiacal context, we have this search for truth, art, deity, oneself, that all these obviously intermingle and overlap, sometimes can be separated, sometimes not. And this seekership, especially in women's works, means the search for intimate spirituality, which very often doesn't end with any subscription to any religious or esoteric doctrine or current. It's just so important for the protagonist of the novel that I would somehow like to emphasize it as a very, very important aspect of intimacy in these works. And by work so far, the 2 articles that I have written on the subject would be dealing with the work, obviously, of Al Onerva again, and I have been juxtaposing it with the work by Eino Leino, Al Onerva's contemporary, a poet and a literary figure of a very prolific character, canonized very solidly in the Finnish literary history, very famous in Finland, who also works or employs this figure of the seeker very, very visibly in his work, but within almost exclusively male perspective. He has got some women seekers, but they are much flatter, as much more flat as figures than the male protagonists, while obviously in Al Onerva's work this is very different. Most seekers are women. The figure is always gendered, be it a man or woman, and this highlighting of a special kind of intimacy is something that I would like to work with more. To conclude is our actually contemporary research, which relates to my one of those research projects of mine that Carmen kindly mentioned, text of the on the move, reception of women's writing in Finland and Russia is the name of the project, and with some colleagues from this project we wrote an article and held a presentation in this workshop, Rethinking Intimacy in Women's Reading and Writing at the Peripheries of Europe, which was hosted by the University of Gothenburg, organized by Birgitta, Carmen, and myself in October 2020, a bit belatedly, but there will be more talk about this, so I will just mention it. And obviously we held the presentation there. It was Arja Rosenholm who held it, and then we have been developing this topic into an article. Spatialized intimacy, literary mapping in writing and reception of Russian-Finnish cultural mediator Mari Linder is something that most visibly connects to the background of the cooperation between us colleagues here present, also stemming from the COST action where we all met, thanks to Suzanne van Dijk, who was the chair of this COST action, and where our cooperation began, and these ideas about transnational women's networks and transnational reception of women writers in Europe opened to me in its full, again, complexity and beauty, I would say. So here in the article, we have under scrutiny the transnational, transborder literary figure of Mari Linder, an author of Russian origin who moved to Finland and wrote in Swedish. And we are using a method, an adapted method, I can say, of literary cartography, gendering of spaces, and asking how is intimacy produced and experienced in relation to gendered agency in private and public spaces. And as Birgitta has also mentioned, we also find very important the fact that unless, of course, we are not definitely going to fall into any easy biographic method, but we are juxtaposing the author figure and her heroine, Lucy Suffridge. The name is very telling, from the novel A Woman of Our Time, written in Swedish and translated also in Danish from 1867. And yeah, that is something that is now under scrutiny. The first version of the article is ready, and we are looking forward to develop it further for the anthology that then will be again covered by my colleagues here. So I think that I will end here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Right. Let me check if my microphone is on. Yes, I think it is. Right. Thank you so much, Viola. Sorry for your wonderful contribution to this webinar. It's really extremely valuable, your account, and I think that all the audience and especially our students have benefited tremendously from your presentation, because it was a extremely how should I put it, methodological account of how research can be integrated, how a topic can be integrated into research, and might I say research at the best, at the top level. And I'm glad to see that there are so many students participant today, and I'm really hoping that we will take this discussion further with them with other occasions. And it's really impressive, your account of your research. Thank you very much, Viola, once again. It's been an inspiration. And you have been mentioning, you have mentioned actually briefly our history of our collaborative background, and perhaps it's the time to give some more insight into this topic and how we historically have met. You mentioned the Women Writers Network, and I would like to just a second. I have actually prepared the virtual environment to project with project for today. 1 second. All right, this is the first. Right. So as you have mentioned, Viola, we are here today really due to Susan van Dijk's Women Writers Network, or her founding the Women Writers Network, which is a network which has been bringing together European scholars for many years. And we have been sort of revolving around this network and the virtual research environment, which I have projected here. And ever since we have carried out collaborative research on female authorship, and you said that you fully benefited from this environment, wonderful environment. It's been really a think tank for us, and it made a lot of us flourish in on these footsteps. So within this scope, within this umbrella, we each of us started creating their own clusters. And in the field of intimacy, our first initiative, as you mentioned, yes, was to organize this exploratory workshop. It was meant to be a conference, but then it was more refrained to a workshop format, rethinking intimacy in women's reading and writing between the 700s and the 1900s. And I would like to, if you bear with me, I'd like to share with you the nice poster. Okay, I don't know if you can see it. No, not yet. Should be able to see it. So this was in 2016, and it was hosted by the Faculty of Foreign Languages at Dimitrie Cantemir University, where I'm currently, and I have been teaching for quite a long time. And then I invited scholars from the Coast Action, which you mentioned, which was again initiated by Susan van Dijk. And we joined for the first time to present our work in intimacy. And Birgitta, you kindly accepted my offer to be the key speaker at that time. And at this first workshop, we focused on scenarios of intimacy. We examined the role and influence of intimacy on the history of women's reading and writing practices. And we explored both recent developments in the area of intimacy in feminine écriture and the links between intimacy and the experience of homelanding to the feminist movement emancipation. And we looked at a wide range of aspects of intimacy, or intimacies, if you will. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but from intimacy as love, you know, the classic understanding, to anti-intimacy, even to ignorance, incompatibility, indiscretion, and so on. So obviously, having given the account of how what a key research focus is so in your research, Viola, this concept stirred your interest, and I'm very glad it was so. And you joined our small team to organize the second exploratory workshop, which took place in October 2020. Hosted by Gothenburg University under your professional guidance, Birgitta. And I'm going to stop sharing this one and share the other poster, just to get a taste of our common work together. I'm hoping that that you can see the second poster. Right, so this time we also invited scholars within the coast and further from the RAIA activities and other scholars to expand on the topic of the first workshop. But this time we focused on a more theoretical discussion. We added transnational and spatial perspective. And so we further narrowed the scope and focused on the so-called fringes of Europe. And this is why you'll find the term fringe in our webinar today. So we addressed such questions as how was the intimacy topos reflected in women's literature and the reception of it in these parts of Europe, at the fringes of Europe. How were the influences from French women writers negotiated, for instance, because in most of these cultures, the French influence was paramount. How did different social and cultural backgrounds, such as religious, Protestant or Orthodox religion, respectively, influence the expression and discussions of these topoi of intimacy? So these are the types of questions, research questions, that were at the core of our webinar, our workshop. And we had very positive feedback, if I may say so, and to our workshop. This is the reason why I thought it would be perhaps wise to further to take this topic further and present it today in this workshop and in this webinar, and who knows what might stem from here. One certain thing, concrete outcome is definitely our anthology. Because the contributors' research gave us sufficient and very qualitative, sufficient material for articles for a planned anthology. And maybe Birgitta, you'd like to talk about our anthology a bit more?
I always do this, start talking without having my mic on. I'm sorry, I never learned.
You're not the only one, don't worry.
Yes, the anthology. I don't remember, Carmen, if you said that, if you mentioned that it was a digital workshop. We had a digital.
I don't think I did.
We don't want to look like irresponsible people. We had a digital workshop because of the corona pandemic, and that also the pandemic also. We had to postpone everything because of the pandemic. It came, I think, a week before we originally had decided to have the workshop at Gothenburg University in the spring. So we had to postpone it, and we had to make it digital. And this meant that we said we need to do this in another way than we would have done if we all had met in Gothenburg. So at the workshop, we discussed first draft articles, which the participants very, very generously shared and presented. So right from the beginning, we were aiming at producing an anthology. And final versions of the article were submitted in December, and Dr. Parente Chapkova, Dr. Duktu, and myself are presently editing the volume. And this volume is planned to be published in the Women Writers in History series at Brill Rhodope this year. And we are very pleased to be that our anthology will be one of many interesting volumes in the Women Writers in History series. What else can I say? The forthcoming anthology will have the title Rethinking Intimacy in Women's Reading and Writing at the Fringes of Europe, Spatiality, Temporality, and Transnationality. And it includes chapters by researchers from the Czech lands, Finland, the Netherlands, Romania, Russia, Slovenia, Sweden, and Turkey. And this is always very dangerous to try to describe the nationalities, because a lot of the researchers have experienced living in different nations. And it's the same thing with many of the women authors that we write about in this anthology. The chapters investigate in different ways and in different genres how spatiality or temporality structures the scene and scenarios of intimacy in literary universes, for example, through the notion of vicinity or movement between spaces. It investigates how intimacy and anti-intimacy are mediated, as well as illuminated through the mapping of literary landscapes, how they are constructed by nation, gender, class, and sexuality. And also the impact of geographical and historical distances and movements on narrative strategies of intimacy are explored. And so are narrative connections between nations, cultures, and historical periods, and women writers at the fringes of Europe. The contributors in this planned anthology will take you on a round trip to the fascinating literary and cultural sites of intimate spaces of the Euro fringes through the 1800s into the beginning of the 2000s. And the contributors will introduce you to women writers from Spain, Italy, Sweden, Romania, Finland, Slovenia, the Czechlands, and other countries. But as I touched upon earlier, the anthology also shows that defining the nationality of some of these women writers is not an easy task, as they move between different countries and the national borders didn't look the same way that they do today. On top of these things, some of the women were multilingual and wrote in other languages than their own mother tongue. They can certainly be defined as nomadic and with hybrid identities. So that dimension is also problematized with the choice of the authors and the intimacy presented in the literature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Birgitta. Yes, we are on high horses, so to say. So we're trying to raise the bar for ourselves, definitely with this anthology. I'm sure it will be a wonderful outcome. Well, our time for our presentations and interaction is almost up, because we do want to allow our wonderful audience today. I mean, we are altogether 35 people, so it would be wonderful to have at least half an hour to interact with our audience if there are, and I'm sure there are questions. But before that, allow me to, well, actually to ask first to ask the two of you, my guests. We have had wonderful interventions, and I'd like you to make your final comments, and if you have anything that you would like to add at this point. Viola, maybe?
Yeah, the mic is on. I'm sorry. So yeah, thank you very much. And I was just now thinking, since you, Carmen, have been working with the concept of fringe, we have been talking about peripheries, and there are margins, and now fringe. If you could just elaborate a bit on this concept.
Well, have you got a week? So it's thank you very much for this. Actually, this is what I should have started with, because it's the concept is in the very title of our webinar. But somehow I got carried away with our presentations and discussion. So yes, Viola, you actually it's a very complex answer, but obviously I will only take a few minutes out of our time, because you and Birgitta and everybody, almost our colleagues present here, that there is more than meets the eye here. You know, this discussion regarding margins and peripheries is there is an entire body of literature behind us that problematizes, has been problematizing ever since post-colonial studies this issue of peripheries, and not only from a political correctness point of view, but also because it is a quite evidence has shown, especially coming from feminist historiography, has shown that these concepts of margins, peripheries versus, you know, this binomial margins and peripheries versus center is quite problematic. And I'm not going to get into too much detail or any detail right now, but the idea is that, so I'll just give you the account of what my concerns have been on the matter. Not give an account of the theory of it, and you have much more knowledge on this theoretical part than I do, while I'm sure. So, to be honest, I've been preoccupied with finding a better term for periphery since 2011. Yeah, and because I felt, but at that time I wasn't very knowledgeable of the theory of it. But then, of course, I read whatever had to be read on the subject. So I felt it as problematic for so many reasons that we all know: limitative, negative connotation, exclusive, and so on. Yeah. So my latest exploration of the concept will appear in this anthology that Birgitta has very kindly described. And all this time, now it's been 10 years, right? My challenge was to prove that the cultural exchanges and influences are and cannot be unidirectional, that the transfer of culture has been equally important from the margins, so-called margins, peripheries, to the center, and not just from the center to margins and periphery. So I set myself to find if there was any category that could have encapsulated and at the same time transcend the limitations of this conceptual absolute. So my objective became to propose, as I said, a different concept, a third way, more satisfactory one to encapsulate these exchanges between the traditional categories. So I borrowed from European studies, and I found this concept of fringe to replace periphery. So in my research on Fin de siècle Romanian feminine authorship, as I've said, for a decade now, I have been examining women writers' narratives and found that there was not only a subtle transfer of French and European modernity into the European culture, in the Romanian culture, but also that the Romanian culture via women affected the French culture. And all this cultural transfer was possible especially because of, or due to, women's contribution to culture and politics through the very category of intimacy. And this is why, in case we're wondering why intimacy, well, you have very, you have proven both of you from that your cultures, coming from periphery, require this core center to core concept to be further examined. And now I'm adding my culture to the argument. So, and I'm talking about intimacy in a broader sense, understood as a cultural topos. So my theory is that fringe, to wrap it up, fringe is the space in between. You mentioned, and I was really happy with your in between, mentioning in betweenness, Birgitta, at some stage. So that fringe is the space in between, and the intimacy is the gate, if you will, towards this transient space. So fringe territory is inhabited by transnationality, but it's also a utopos. It's a chronotope, and the land of in-betweenness. It's peripheral and it's central. It is intimate and public at the same time. And you mentioned all these things, Viola, in your wonderful presentation. But as I said, we don't have a week to talk about this. It's just a 1 hour webinar followed by wonderful, I'm sure, wonderful questions. So I hope that this tease of my obsession with fringe theory answers to a certain extent your question.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we will continue now.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. So once again, thank you very much, my guests, for your wonderful contributions today. And now we give the floor to our guests. Katja, not that you're the guest. I mean, you take over.
Thank you very much, Carmen, Birgitta, Viola, for this really rich and compelling presentation, which has shown, I think, how important are transnational connections to understand the richness of women's writing. And I'm sure that your talk has inspired many colleagues and students to comment or ask questions. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but perhaps it is more convenient to ask live the questions. So please do not hesitate. You don't have to raise hand, just speak up. And unmute yourself if you want to say something. Yes, I think Päivi, Päivi on the screen. Hello, Päivi, so nice to see you again.
You have to unmute yourself. Unmute, please. No, she doesn't realize it. Yeah, unmute, please. No.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hello, you all. It's lovely to see you all. And I must thank you both, Birgitta, and as we are from the fringes, both, and of course Viola, and both were so inspiring, and it began. I began to talk about one aspect of that intimacy, because I'm studying girls' literature, early girls' literature. So I began to think about the intimacy between the girls, the protagonist and her best friend. And there is a lot of variation. I mean, there is love and there is caring, and there is very many ways of intimacy. So I mean that I would like to ask that the love between women, how important is it at the beginning of the 19th century, or at the end of the beginning of the 20th century, and at the end of 19th century? And you were, Viola, mostly talking about love between men and women, but what about, are you finding any in your studies any connection between women, really intimate connections?
Can I answer?
Yes, you can. You please.
Well, at the theater, that would be, which is the reception space that I have been researched, that would be quite difficult. I know that True Women, one of the models that Loeffler had for the protagonist was one of her close friends that that loved women, that was a lesbian in our words. But due to different kinds of censorships in her family and so on, she had to change it. It wouldn't be possible to have that at the theater. But also at this period of time, and I'm now talking about the 1870s and 1880s approximately, love between sexuality between women wasn't, or love between women wasn't acknowledged as sex because women weren't considered to have any sexuality. So, but on the other hand, there were a lot of romantic friendships between women. So as I have, this is a kind of speculation, that this must have been a good cover for same-sex love between women, because these romantic friendships that didn't have to include sex might as well have done so because no one suspected it. It wasn't illegal as same-sex relationships or same-sex activities, I should say, between men were at this period of time. But romantic friendships between women was quite accepted. And now I'm speculating again, because the marriage of convenience didn't give women much intimacy. So maybe friendship was really, really important, as was the relationship to children for women.
You have quite right, because I mean that in that girls' literature, the girls they can kiss each other, they can kiss their teacher, and it was quite normal. So women could show somehow this romantic love, and it was allowed to them, not as for men, because it was more sexualized, the relationship between men than women. But there's something very interesting in this romantic love affair, and how intimate the relationships were. So thank you.
Thank you for your very interesting question, Päivi.
Yeah, really, indeed. And if I may just add quickly, because otherwise we can talk private with Päivi, but
Yes.
I just was thinking about the censorship that Birgitta mentioned, that I have been comparing the manuscripts of mainly Ella Onerva's works and other works to the published versions. And in the manuscript of the novel that I have mentioned, Mirdia from 1908, there were quite some passages that one was really surprised that Onerva would use the word homosexual sometimes, describing the love between women, even if it was not yet widely used in those days in the Finnish language. It existed already, but it was very, the medical discourse, or it was just entering the usage in this way. And so sometimes she's just, using these descriptions, also describing the relationships between this pedagogy of seduction between teacher and student, or the pupils, the girl pupils, as Päivi said themselves. And sometimes she just presents it very, naturalizes it, or makes it like normalizes it, that this is the way, of course, girls relate to each other, or teachers and pupils. So it's extremely interesting, but it was completely cancelled from the published version. So the censorship was obviously working.
If I may add, thank you very much, really, Päivi, for this question and comments, because we discussed this topic of the censorship in connection with intimacy with Birgitta, Carmen, and Viola, and we plan to have the third, I think, workshop connected to the censorship, self-censorship, the other practices. So we plan to organize it in the late autumn, probably in November, and to issue the call in March. So you will learn more about it in March, but I see now that this is indeed a good topic to explore it further. So thank you for this encouragement.
Yeah, the things fall naturally right into place. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Okay, Marie is saying goodbye to us. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Susan.
Can I ask a question also?
Yes, please.
Yes, Susan.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Birgitta and Viola, for your talks. Really very, very inspiring. And I would like to have a question for Birgitta. You were speaking about the reception of your 3 women, Charlotte Leffler and the 2 others, and specifying you had been working only on, as far as foreign reception is concerned, English, French, German. So I'm wondering in how far we would need to kind of adapt our common research tool, the virtual research environment, in which there is quite some reception in other countries also for these authors. So I just am very much aware for the reception of Charlotte Leffler. So I think it is something like a pity collaborating as a European group and then focusing again on the most important reception for the most current countries, let's say, in spite of the fact that there is information present in the tool. So how would you suggest to adapt the tool in order to have it more workable for you? Should we oblige everyone to work in English, which actually is more or less the case? Or would you propose to use something like codes or so, plus, minus, or I don't know, all kinds of other indications we might imagine? Or would you think it would make the whole thing also too important, too voluminous, if we include the reception for the whole of Europe, for instance, which could be a problem also, to have dozens of countries to work on? How do you feel about it?
I'm not an expert in how to create databases. The reason that I must say I've concentrated only on Leffler's work when it comes to transnational reception in Europe, and specifically.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Leffler. I know.
Yeah, and specifically on her plays, and I didn't find very much. I worked in a research team, and we decided to first of all use catalogs from libraries to cover to get a full picture. And I didn't find much about plays and theaters as reception spaces. So what I did, I solved the problem with turning to newspaper databases. And the reason why I did so and didn't use the women writers in history database is because I needed to find more information about the plays and the theaters. On the other hand, I might have a lot of information to put into the database right now about that.
Yes, of course, but that's another thing. That's for next research.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's the reason.
And that would be something to be done by students quite easily.
Yeah.
And so this is how you might proceed. Yes,
maybe. If that is possible at the Swedish university, I'm not sure. We cannot use our students in that way, I'm afraid, but there will be other solutions.
They have to work, they have to do something.
Yes.
So
yes, but we have different systems, and I don't want to go into that. I don't think that is very interesting. We'll have
that's the same for us.
But thank you again for your
remember we had the same discussion on putting students to work.
Well, they have to work.
Yes, and I don't want you to give too much on the fact that they are not allowed, Birgitta, because we have students present today.
Yeah, but they have to do their courses, and I cannot say to them that you have to come to my research now and help me with this. Then I would have to pay them, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
System in Sweden, we have strict courses, and that's what the students are to work with.
Maybe our students will move to
Yeah, you're welcome. But they must understand Swedish.
I have a lot of students present today, and thank you and welcome everybody. Pretend that you haven't heard this yet, because I have been asking them to do things, but and they are very not only helpful but also grateful. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Swedish democracy.
Yeah. Madalina, Professor Nicolaescu would like to say something. Yes, Professor.
As I was last time, I was very happy to listen to all of you, and I find it a formidable project, and I'm sure the book is going to be a great success, and I would like to congratulate you all for the work, for the very idea of it, and for managing to have it published by Brill. I was also quite impressed by the idea by Birgitta's research focus on the theater, because women are not very much present in the world of the theater, not even nowadays. And B, the issue of intimacy from the perspective of a woman, I suppose, is even more difficult to unveil. Maybe you can also expand a little bit on the other subject that you've mentioned and that is so very dear to me, melodrama. In what way is a melodramatic structure, which was hugely popular at the time, it was actually the dominant frame, and of course then you have the avant-garde, rising against it. It was popular theater, and of course for a woman to breach gender issues in the theater, you have to go to the popular theater. But maybe you can expand a little bit on melodrama as a facilitating structure.
Thank you for a wonderful question, Madalina. I'm afraid now that you will not be able to stop me. Because this is one of the focal points of departure of my project, because I work from a critical historiographical perspective, and I counter the traditional division between the avant-garde and traditional theater, with melodrama belonging to the tradition at this time, and the new drama of the Scandinavian modern breakthrough that at this time normally in theater histories and literature histories is counted to the avant-garde. And I show that these women, they use melodrama, the melodramatic structures, which were part of the codes to communicate with an audience. They use these conventions and norms at the theater, melodramatic convention and norms at the theater, and they use it and they renegotiate it in the way that they use it. So it's no longer tradition. It becomes an avant-garde instrument to narrate, and they need these structures to be able to narrate intimacy and to criticize the marriage of convenience from from the perspective of emotion and bodily experiences. And I can take one example. For example, as Viola talked about mothers and children, mothers and daughters, the mother and child relationship, this becomes one of it becomes a topos that can be, it's the Garden of Eden that is very much used within melodrama as a Loki, or as a place where that is harmonious. And the mother and child relationship becomes one of these Gardens of Edens in these women's plays. And it becomes a picture for the ideal love between man and women, because they couldn't depict it or discuss it directly, but so it holds a utopian visionary potential, the mother and child relationship, by becoming a pattern or a model for the love between men and women. And then of course the tenderness, the touching, because in these plays mothers and daughters do touch each other, and also the tenderness between mother and child is really, really important. And in that way, it becomes a utopian visionary place for a way to describe the ideal, a new relationship, love relationship between men and women, I could say.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
thank you.
Thank you so very
Thank
much.
you
I'd
for
love
the
to
discussion.
read your essay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to read your essay. Yes.
I think we have some minutes left. So,
Yes.
Alenka?
Oh, one more question.
Yes, I have one question for Viola. Thank you, Brigitte. Thank you, Viola, for your lovely presentation and paper. And I want to ask Viola, what was the reception of this decadent female texts in the Finnish society?
Well, yeah, thank you, Alenka. It's a very interesting question, because obviously what was sometimes highlighted were the critical voices, and there were both from the conservative critics and from the conservative part of the women's movement, which reacted very negatively to the novel. But on the other hand, the author Onerva was associated very closely with the, so to say, bohemian circles of the cultural liberal authors and critics and so on and so forth. And the critic, the reviews that were written by them were quite positive. So we can't dismiss the contradictory nature of the reception, that there were, of course, very critical voices. So the establishment, so to say, was very critical. Also the women's movement, the critical, the conservative part of it, but at the same time she was very closely connected with the circles, which perhaps from our point of view did not fully appreciate all these contradictions that this female figure goes through in that period, that she is, so to say, very liberated, rebelling against so many issues, but at the same time she is inside herself, she is not able to overcome everything. So it's not only the outer constraints that hold her from, so to say, being free, for which she's striving, but it's much more complex. So yeah, but there has been also some appreciation from, so to say, the colleagues and friends.
Oh, that's nice. It's nice to hear that Finnish society, perhaps it was much more open. And for example, I know from the Slovene society, the decadents were accepted very negatively. You know, So it was better in the perhaps more various parts of society and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, on the other hand, the decadence as such was viewed negatively because then it was also, of course, in quarrel with the idea of the young nations as in many other places. So it could not be somehow officially accepted by any means because the rhetoric was going towards this young, brave nation and striving towards the future. So anything to do with decadence was, of course, boycotting this rhetoric. But yeah, it depended really on the critic in question and on these very circles. Definitely, we can still maintain that the, so to say, the reception within the establishment was more negative than positive, definitely.
Mm.
Yes, and I would like to point out that the way Onerva and especially media, the way how they get into the literary history, it was quite hard because I think that media was found really only in 1980s, 1990s.
Yeah,
And
definitely. By the feminist literary scholarship that Päivi also represents, but this is very interesting, I think, because earlier she was appreciated by some scholars like Rafael Koskimies, for example, but only within some individual studies that he would write and forward to her, critical edition or some. No, it was not a critical edition, but let's say some collected works, and he would very positively evaluate sometime in the 1940s, 50s, even the decadent, strand in her work. And he would even comment on this, he would not call it new woman discourse, but to somehow favorably commenting on this search for female subjectivity within the framework that she did it. But the same critic would very negatively comment on her in his huge literary history, which is symptomatic that if it is a small piece of writing, you can somehow acknowledge that a woman was successful, and even these controversial points like decadence and whatever can be appreciated, but the canonized, literary history discourse would still not accept it, even if written by the same person.
Thank you very much, Viola. And now I would like to use the last 2 minutes to invite Professor Nadezhda Alexandrova from Bulgaria to announce our next webinar in February. So please, Nadezhda.
Thank you, Katya, and thank you everyone, Birgitta, Viola, and Carmen, for this wonderful seminar, webinar. It was really inspiring, and I would like to first, in my position of editor of the series in Brill, to congratulate you for your volume and to wish you really success in submitting it, so that we as editors would help you in the future in the process of publishing the volume. So you can rely on us, Susan, Katya, me. We are part of the editorial board to help you in your way through this major publication. Personally, I have really lots of questions to Birgitta, Viola, and Carmen, but I will reserve them for some other occasion. Maybe just want to suggest a workshop not only on censorship, but also on global melodrama, perhaps, or European women's literature and melodrama in it. It is really inspiring aspect of Birgitta's work.
Nadia, that will be the 4th workshop then in Sofia. There we go.
Why not? Yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
I would help in organizing such an event. So as far as my presentation is concerned, we appointed it on the 26th of February, Friday at 4 o'clock Eastern European time. And I will be speaking about bilingual authors in the Ottoman Empire and Bulgarian territories in the 19th century. So 3 women writers, a Czech one, a Serbian one, and a Bulgarian in Romania one. 3 of them. I will show to you their profiles, their capacity to use both languages, their feeling of discomfort when they use one or another. So these will be the aspects of my presentation for the next workshop in February.
Great.
So looking forward to seeing you all.
Looking forward to it, yeah.
We do.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you again in our next webinar. Have a nice weekend and see you soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katja.
Thank you.
Katja.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.